and then selling them back to continental Europe. And I looked at the incoming goods and the outgoing goods, and it's about the same. It's around 80% both ways. What do we need? What does business need? How do we keep ourselves in the game, keep our what I'd call quality jobs in Cumbria? We've got to have the lowest cost, so why is it all on truck and why is it all that way? And well, industrialists, I'm afraid, are not going to necessarily sponsor this. They will be encouraged and can be encouraged, but they're not going to sponsor alternative means. They're going to look for the cheapest means to service their market, because we are competing with European companies. They don't have the issue of coming from Cumbria to their heart. They're in the heart of what you might call continental Europe. We've got to get there. We've got to get there efficiently and effectively. So we've got to obviously have the lowest cost that is achievable, and industrialists will always be driven to get the lowest cost for their goods to market. We can't tell our customers that they'll get a delivery on a Wednesday and it arrives on a Thursday or a Friday. It doesn't work like that. Today, and you've seen it on maybe more and more programs now, that in UK deliveries, we're given hour slots. That's the case more and more in continental Europe as well. An hour slot. So it's not even to a day, it's often to an hour that they're prepared to receive goods. So an issue there about reliability is fundamental. And that gets back to, well, what service and how do we work it? Because if you're on a truck and you're monitoring a truck with GPS and whatever, you know exactly where the truck is and when it's going to arrive to the hour. If you start moving other ways, you've got to look at that and how can you make that more sophisticated. When you think about it, and my concept is that to have an industrial entry and exit of Cumbria, which is through the port of Workington, is quite an interesting thing to imagine. That's how we get in, that's how we get out. And we can have the rail services and we can have the road services for pedestrians or for people, but the goods come and go from the port of Workington. It's an interesting concept to conjure with.
There's a typical UK person. That's roughly speaking the carbon footprint of everything they consume in a year, somewhere around the 15 tonnes mark, and we can argue about whether he's more or less. He doesn't travel all that much, so that probably helps him. In fact, I'd say he's probably relatively speaking, quite a low carbon guy. If he was totally typical, and sorry about the sort of, I know it's hard to read the detail here. I'll talk you through some of the relevant bits of it. But his pie would break down like this. There'd be a chunk here, blue chunk there for household fuel. There'd be a chunk. The red chunk there is his vehicle fuel at 10%. I'll just do the transport bits of this. The vehicle fuel at 10% there. Here, the car itself. That's the embodied carbon that it takes to make and maintain the car. That's around the 5% mark. So roughly speaking, about half as important as the vehicle fuel itself. So it's great that supermarkets are getting on top of their carrier bags and so on, because plastic floating around the world is nasty for lots of reasons, but it doesn't constitute a response to climate change. So it's about a 1,000th of, if you're carrying a disposable plastic bag home full of food, about 1,000th of it is the plastic bag on the outside, the rest is the contents of it. So to have one flight to Hong Kong and back, the same carbon footprint in your disposable shopping bags, you'd have to go to the supermarket 10 times a day, every day of the year, and every trip you'd have to come home with 100 carry bags. So I just say this to illustrate the need to keep that sense of perspective. So here's some transport things. So this is London to Glasgow and back. As ever, all these estimates are kind of rough. So 120 kilograms if you go by train, roughly speaking. If you go by bike, if you eat sensible food like bananas, for example, if you've got the time for it, so about 53 kilograms, my best estimate. About 2.3 tons if you're powered entirely by air-freighted asparagus, which, if anyone wants to try that, I'd be very interested to hear how you get on. Here's driving a car, about 330 kilograms, a sort of typical, average, reasonably economical car. So about 3 times the train. It starts looking better if you pack it full of people. So for example, a family driving up to the Lake District for a week in a reasonably economical car, 4 people in the car, might actually, could be at least as good as the train, actually, in our analysis. Going by plane, is the highest carbon option, and it's even worse if you've got a whole family as well, because it's 500 kilograms per seat. Just on this, I tried to come here. I live in Kendal. Kendal's on the West Coast main line, so's Penrith. I tried to come to this conference by train. You'd think it'd be pretty easy. I've got a little folding bike, which I use a lot for all the reasons Lynn's mentioned. It's good for lifestyle, it gets me my exercise and all the rest of it. It was not possible to do because trains that stop at Oxenholme and stop at Penrith come about every 3 hours. Now, if I'd been able to take that train, I could have also done half an hour's work each way. I would have got my little bit of exercise quietly into the day without having to take time out of the day. It would have been fantastic for loads of different perspectives. Probably would have been cheaper. Would have been, all in all, great for the economy and lifestyle and carbon. But couldn't be done because the trains just simply don't run on that line, even though it exists. So just out now is we've just finished an analysis of the carbon footprint of the Lake District National Park. Which I know is only a part of Cumbria, but I mentioned it. I've put a picture of a very basic map up there because all carbon footprint studies like this are, the numbers are always best estimates with the best will in the world. But it's looking at the carbon footprints of residents and visitors, plus getting there and away, plus visitors getting there and away. So some things it doesn't cover. It doesn't cover land use, and it doesn't look specifically at business, except for the visitor economy. But just to show you quickly a few things that come out of this for perspective, if you look at it, there's 3 chunks in that pie. I'm conscious some of the words could be a bit small to read here, sorry about that. So this is residents, the blue chunk there at 31%, everything they buy and do in their lifestyles. This is visitors at 28%. It's about as many visitors as residents at an average time in the national park. And the biggest chunk of the pie, the green one, is visitors getting there and away. We'll whistle on a bit. Lots of detail here, but I'll just show you that the red bit in this chart is the chunks of visitors getting there and away. That's travel to and from. And the biggest chunk there, just reach it, that's flying. And that's 5% of visitors flying to the national park. I'll show just very quickly, but I won't go into it in detail. I'll just tell you some of the things that would be on this if you could read all the detail. The top is the breakdown of an average UK person. Here's a Lake District National Park resident, and one of the things about that is that we think they drive about twice as much as a typical UK person. It's not surprising because it's a rural economy. Visitors do a lot more driving. This is visitors here. They do a lot more driving than a typical UK person does per day. And this bottom chunk here is visitors getting there and away. And the red chunk is flying, and the green and the purple together are the fuel for the car and the car itself.
So, where I want to start is that transport in itself, of course, is health promoting for people. The whole issue of the movement of goods and people is what enables our life to be rich and for people to access the services that they need, to access employment opportunities, whether in an on-your-bike way or another way. But also it's about getting to friends and family, building social networks and building social capital. And all those things are incredibly important for Cumbria. But within that context, it's how we do it. There are huge benefits to walking and cycling, but there are huge costs to other methods of transport, and those are the ones that we tend to operate as default. Now, I'm going to have to apologise for this slide because the print's awfully small, but the concept of the iceberg is meant to imply that what we see in terms of the damaging effects of transport is really the tip of the iceberg. So we all know about road accidents and deaths, casualties on the road as being a serious byproduct of a lot of our transport systems. We know about respiratory effects, effect of asthma on children, and that sort of thing. We know about the effect of noise in built-up areas where people are sharing their living space with transport activity. But there are a whole lot of other health impacts that we haven't really ever properly assessed. An example would be social isolation of people who actually don't easily have access to a private car. Probably all of us in this room, or most of us in this room at least, either personally or through their networks, have access to a private car. But there are big chunks of our society where people